Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Strategy Series officially. This is a kind of a monthly webinar that we run at Gearhart Law. Gearhart is, many of you know, but if you don't know, Gearhart is an international IP firm. We do everything IP related, copyrights, trademarks, patents, trade secrets in the US and around the world. And we kind of run this webinar monthly on the last Thursday of every month, talking about kind of all kinds of things that you as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as professionals might want to know as it relates to IP, both legally and kind of more generally from kind of a business perspective. We have a great topic today and great speakers. We're talking about branding, everything you might want to know when it comes to picking a name for your new brand, your new company, whatever it may be, designing a logo, kind of both balancing the legal considerations, which is something we might handle, and the kind of marketing, strategic business considerations, which you might handle. And so we're going to be talking about that today. Just so you're aware, we'll have time at the end for questions if you want to kind of raise any questions at the end, or if you want to throw them in the chat during the call, throw them in the chat, and we may or may not field them depending on how relevant it is to the conversation at that moment. I'm Stephen Frydman. I'm going to be kind of moderating this call today. I am a JD at Gearhart Law and been working here for, I guess, almost 4 years now, which is a little crazy. And yeah, just probably my fourth or so ESS. Really excited for today, and I think we're going to have a great time. Our first, I guess, speaker, if you could if you could say that, might be probably a familiar face to many of you if you've come here before or if you're a client. David Pistolsky, partner at Gearhart Law, super expert in all things kind of IP related. Really, really great. Excited for you to kind of speak. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, David?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming. Our first ESS of 2024. We're really excited about it. Super excited that Stephen's going to be moderating as well. I've been an IP and patent attorney for about 20 years and started my career at really large law firms and really large companies, and decided about 10 or 12 years ago that I wanted to devote my life to startups, entrepreneurs, and emerging companies. And that's what I've been doing, and that's what we do at Gearhart Law. So excited for the other speakers on the panel. I think you're all going to get a lot out of this today, and thank you for coming every month. We appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, David. And yeah, like you said, our other speakers today, we have two speakers from Emblem, which is a really, really incredible branding firm in New York. They do some really, really great work internationally and in the US, and just they're really, really impressive if you follow what they do. All kinds of kind of branding work with companies and people, and they do research and release all these brand studies, which are really, really cool. And we have two of the experts from Emblem here today, Rena and Ashwin. And if you guys want to kind of briefly introduce yourselves, kind of talk about Emblem a little bit.
Hey everyone, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for coming out today. I'm Ashwin Kulathangan, an associate partner at Emblem. Thank you for the introduction. And as Stephen mentioned, we are an intimacy agency. We are a boutique agency. We do full service end-to-end work with all of the clients that we work with. We're headquartered here in New York City, but we have offices around the world. And I can also pull up a couple of slides and give you a brief intro about the firm when we get there. At Emblem, I play a role between strategy and also design. I help bridge the work that my partner Rena does on strategy, and kind of help pull that through into what we do in design, working with our studio and our design director. Rena?
Sure. Thanks, Ashwin. My name is Rena Plapler. I'm a partner at Emblem. I've been working in branding for almost 30 years, just hard to say out loud. And I run strategy, which for us has to do with the verbal side of branding, so naming, which I know is a focus today, as well as messaging, research, content, Anything on that aspect, Ashwin, for today is really going to focus more on the design. So between the two of us, we're going to be happy to share and talk about building strong brands from both a naming and design perspective.
Awesome. Yeah, super excited. And yeah, Alicia, I guess you can give them kind of screen share allowance. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but if you guys want to talk about emblem,
Sure.
the foundations, whatever you have planned.
Sure. We just have a couple of slides that may be of interest. We're, I think, trying to screen share, so give us a second.
Yeah, I think you just need to give us access and we can get on. Or enable screen sharing, rather.
Alicia, that's you.
Yes,
host.
yes, sorry, 1 minute.
Talk about branding. I've got my Gearhart Law mug going on over here.
Hopefully everybody can see the screen.
Yeah, we can
one
see it.
thing we start with is we actually spell our name MBLM. So this is often a slide we do to let people know it's pronounced emblem. A lot of people, when they don't know us, will spell out the name and say, can I speak to someone from MBLM? So that is something to think about when you name, is how people will say it if they don't see it. We are a small agency, but we do have offices in 5 countries. We really like that because it gives our work a global perspective, and that is something to consider in naming. Even if your name is going to be focused, let's say, in the United States, depending who you're attracting, you might want to make sure that the name doesn't have any cultural issues in any major languages, French, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, Chinese, etc. So our network is one way that we just tap in and make sure that the name is not only strong, but is kind of safe from a cultural perspective. I think you heard we are the brand intimacy agency. That means that we really believe that emotion is the strongest way to build bonds between brands and stakeholders. It's really not us who think that. Only a lot of work has been done over the past maybe 10, 15 years in behavioral science and neuroscience that shows people actually make the majority of decisions based on emotion, and that we rationalize those decisions after the fact to make us feel like it was a logical choice. So we think it's important when you're building a brand that you think about not just the rational components of what does my brand need to stand for and communicate in my name, but also what do I want people to feel? What am I all about? How do I want to connect with customers? And so I've co-written a book about this with my partner Mario, and it's really been the sort of North Star emblem to try to imbue a strong sense of emotion into all our work. Besides being smart and an effective way to market, it also makes business sense. Stephen mentioned research we've done over the years, and what we found is that the more people are connected emotionally to a brand, the more engaged they are. There's a greater willingness to pay more for the brand, and they're less willing to live without it. And we track the top intimate brands yearly and compare them to the S&P and Fortune 500. And what we found is that intimate brands outperform on revenue and price in the short term and in the long term. So it also makes business sense, which we think is important for many of you who are running businesses or business owners. And the last slide on emblem, any agency you work with has probably a different process or way to structure services. We're a full service agency, and I'm sharing this because maybe it also will help you think about how to build your brand. We bucket our services by essence, story, and experience. Essence is really the foundation. I think I heard somebody's doing a startup and you're in that early phase. So it might be, concepting, but this is where, you have the components to build an external facing brand. If you need to understand your audience or your market, that's research and insights. Brand identity is your logo and visual system, which Ashwin's going to speak to more later. Naming is something we're talking about, as well as brand strategy. What story are you telling? How are you positioned? And then there's just more detailed components that support a large brand or a brand that's growing. Story is really, as it sounds, besides your foundation, how do you talk to the market? Are you creating content, thought leadership, social media, campaigns? How are you communicating in different channels and different touch points to different audiences? And experience is really activation. That's sort of getting all the details right, thinking about, your website, events, environments, how you're measuring or tracking, inbound, outbound, et cetera. So just in a snapshot, some of the ways that we look at brands and the way we organize. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And like, I feel like it's kind of a great way to think about it from that perspective. Is kind of a three-step kind of thing. You're at the ground floor where you're first starting, and you can kind of build up to kind of a complicated brand experience. So I guess let's start from the ground floor. Like, you have an entrepreneur or a business owner. He has an idea, he has a product, he has services he wants to sell. But he doesn't know what he wants to name his company or his product or whatever. What is kind of the considerations that he should be thinking about when he's choosing that name, when he's trying to kind of build that brand intimacy right from the start?
Sure. We have a couple of slides too that might help show a little bit of that. First,
Sure.
A name is really important. It is often the first thing that somebody hears. And while it's not everything, it does convey in shorthand, a clear articulation of what the company or product or service is about. So we know it's important. It's a big decision, and it's complicated. Also, you kind of want to think about, naming a brand is like naming a child. Once you have a name, it's more complicated to change it. So you kind of want to get it right from the start. It's one of those things that it's worth spending a little more time to pick the right name than having to undo or redo your efforts a year later. We've got a process here that we use, and anyone can follow a process like this or simplify it to their needs. But the first thing is understanding really what you're naming. So who is this name? It's, of course you want to like the name, but who is the name targeted to? Who are you attracting or trying to attract? So what markets, what audiences, what jurisdictions? What's your business goal? Is this meant to be something that's niche and can afford to be a little more abstract or obscure? Is it meant to be mainstream? So just understanding, where the business is going and what you plan to be selling or offering is important. The attitudes and kind of the marketplace is important. Understanding your competitors, both so that you don't sound just like them, but also seeing the types of names that are being used in the category. There's descriptive names, there's abstract names, there's suggestive names, there's eponymous names, meaning after yourself or the founder. There's location names. So depending on what makes the most sense, there's different avenues to consider. And then if you've done naming before, sometimes we always suggest go back and look at your previous efforts. Maybe there's a hidden gem or something you thought about that you could repurpose. In our case, we spend a lot of time talking to the client or the client team and get their perspectives. From that briefing, we start to develop names. We start by looking at themes. So our names are kind of grounded and rooted in criteria. What types of names are we creating? What do we want to convey or communicate? We sometimes use visuals or graphics to inspire us. So sometimes thinking outside of just the literal words, but what does it want to feel like? We look at the other things that the name can suggest. So besides what it means, are there other richer connotations that we can associate? We look at roots of language quite a bit. I don't know if anyone studied Latin. It comes in very handy if you want to do naming, because it's an interesting way to look at roots or history, or depending on your particular brand. If it's, a food brand, are there different words for that food type in different languages, and do they have any interesting stories? If it's a company coming together with another company, is there anything about the combined strengths that they bring that is something you need to convey. So we look at all of those things. Emotional associations we've talked about. We try to make sure our themes are emotional to begin with, but then we also look at making sure any name we suggest has some of that richness to it. Language specifics, looking at domain, and we do initial legal screens. We can get into more of that later, but it's mostly looking at Google and the USPTO database to see just at a cursory level if the name is taken and in what trademark classes. We'll let Stephen and David talk more about that. And then we often have to do more than one round. So we repeat it, we then present it, and then have our clients evaluate. One of the things we always suggest is that you don't fall in love with one name and that you pick several because of the trademark complexity. And that way you have a greater chance of making sure one of the names passes and goes through with low risk. And we then finalize, and that's a lot of the legal work again, which we know takes time. But sometimes it takes 3 rounds, usually it takes 2. We tend to do about 10 to 12 names that we present. But to get that, we have to create many more, which you'll see in a slide or two. So that's our methodology. Some of the things we ask our clients to understand, we call a naming blueprint. So we like to look at the history of the brand, anything that's authentic and unique. So we ask if there's anything in the company background that could inspire name ideas. If it's a new company, we ask about what was the inspiration for the company, or just understanding more of the history and nuance that we could use. We ask if there's any requirements that we need to be aware of. Is there anything, the name shouldn't convey? Are there any types of names you don't like? What do you want the name to communicate? What's the most important thing? What kind of name do you want? Like I said, is it a descriptive name? Those are much harder to trademark. Is it an abstract name? Those are usually easier, but need more work to explain what the company is. Is it a combination of words? And then, does the client or anyone we're talking to feel that there's any territories or richness that they want the name to convey? Understanding, that's interesting, what we want things to be used for. We also ask if there's anything special about the name and the offering that we capture.
Yeah, I feel like you take like a really interesting kind of holistic approach. You're kind of talking about all these different considerations that go into it, like your, the abstract name or descriptive, and like how much you kind of want to convey with the name, and how to get kind of that emotional connection with the consumer ultimately. So kind of how, I don't like, it seems kind of hard to balance all of these different things. Like, what is your kind of advice, someone that is trying to balance all of these things and coming up with a name? Like what should they be prioritizing, I guess?
You want to take that, or?
Sure. Maybe less than priorities when you're thinking of name generation. It's better to look at them as opportunities. There's, as Rena mentioned, once you get to kind of the end of that process and you've gone through a lot of these names and you've tried to whittle them down, you're arriving at kind of a legal checkpoint where the options that you have available may shrink dramatically based on what you find with the legal search. So leading up to that, it's good to have a selection that excites you, right? And that kind of seizes on those opportunities that you're either the history of your business or the nature of your product or any of the other kind of constraints that you put in there present to you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Probably having a good selection that you could wind up choosing from, so you're not kind of stuck with one thing just in case there is a legal kind of hurdle to pass, which we will get into in a little bit. But I guess kind of what we also wanted to talk about with you guys is not just the name, but kind of when a name turns into a logo for a company. When is kind of a good point for that to start? Do you want to kind of do that at the same time as the name? How does kind of one mesh a logo and a name together so they're kind of seamless? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's different approaches based on the maturity of your business and how you're kind of entering the process. We worked with clients across that spectrum. So we've worked with clients who are defining either a new brand or a new product with a brand, with an associated brand, and going into market with that. And they don't have any of those components yet, right? They don't have a name, perhaps. They don't have an identity, a logo. They don't have any of the elements that you would consider fundamental to a brand at that point. And everything kind of needs to happen. We've also, of course, worked with clients who are farther along in that process. They may already have a name identified, but they have no, visualization of that, right? There's no visual identity associated with it, and that's the part that they're trying to solve. At the other end of the spectrum, you also have, clients that have existed in market for a long time and are either changing their names or changing their visual identities in one way or the other to reflect some sort of evolution in their business. Either change in their business priorities or mergers and acquisitions that may kind of affect the future direction of the company. So along that spectrum, there's different ways to, I think, engage with that problem and solve that challenge with our clients. There are times when we've separated the process and gone more sequentially. So, a typical process would look like we do naming first, and then after that, we arrive at the logo and identity process. And the reason for doing it in a structured way like that would be either we understand that the business, how the client defines the business hasn't been fully formulated, and kind of doing that name exploration is part of the way in which they'll arrive at defining the business as well. That happens sometimes. At other moments, there are, I guess, constraints on the design side that won't be addressed until you know what the name is.
Right.
Oftentimes, knowing the name can give you great opportunities in the design because ideally you want all of the elements of your brand to connect together: name, positioning, design, all of those things put together. And I haven't talked about positioning and strategy by itself, but that's another component that kind of lives with those three fundamental pieces, right? And then a separate approach, a different approach would be to kind of pair those processes together. And we've also done that, and that can be very successful, especially when you're creating something from scratch and you're not evolving it. So when you're creating something from scratch, if you put the naming process and the identity process together, and this is something that we often do for our clients, you kind of work both of those work streams in parallel, and then you kind of present a unified view in a couple of different options, pairing name and identity, or pairing positioning and identity in ways that are more powerful for the client to kind of understand. So when you're thinking of a smaller brand, often it can be useful to kind of put those processes together. If you're looking to make a smaller investment, kind of move fast, it can be useful to kind of see how those intersect and work together. If you have a larger brand and you're making more significant investment, and there's other components like research or stakeholder interviews and things like that that come into it, you may want to follow a more structured process that kind of gives you time to fully detail all those components.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think. And yeah, we did have a question in the chat, which I'm not going to read word for word, but I think I kind of want to get your take on generally. Obviously, you guys do some really kind of nuanced work. You kind of take into all these considerations, but some people here or watching kind of at home might be kind of a smaller brand, kind of trying to do this by themselves, kind of trying to pick themselves up. So like what would be kind of a brief, a little bit of advice you might want to give someone if they don't have the time or the resources to kind of engage with a branding firm like you guys or someone else? What if they want to kind of try to do this themselves? What would kind of be your advice to them? What is their kind of first thing they should be thinking of when they try and come up with a name or a logo?
Sure. I mean, I think it is a simplified version of the process that we shared, which is, get as clear as you can about what the offering or company or service is so that you know clearly what you're naming. If you're not 100% sure, you think it may change, then keep in mind you probably want to create a name that's more flexible or broader so that it can grow with you. I would look at your competitive set online. I would Google around because, again, you want to stand out, so you don't want to sound just like everybody else. I would come up with a series of themes. If you're a food brand and one of the, I would develop 3 themes or 2 themes to just ground the naming idea. So one could be taste. You know, one could be quality of ingredients. One could be nutrition. One could be aspiration, like how good people will feel, you know, when they have the product. And so those can just kind of guide the naming development, so you don't feel like you're just creating names out of thin air. And then I would try to come up with a bunch of different names. Depending on the category, you know, there's, I think, over 3 million trademark names and only 200,000 words in the English language. So sometimes you have to get creative and combine words and try combinations of things. But, you know, that's where you guys come in and can, you know, advise clients. Or, like I said, you can Google any of the names that you come up with and see what pops up. And that'll give you a clue as to the likelihood of you being able to trademark that name. You can also talk to lawyers to see if you need to trademark the name, and if you know, that's recommended. But so it's a similar process. It's just simpler. It's really trying to get aligned to, you know, what is it you want the name to convey, and what are some different themes that give you some creative license to come up with those names.
And I think Rena mentioned looking at competitors and seeing what they're doing. You know, I assume that if you're starting a business, if you're starting a new company or launching a new product, you're already doing that, right? You're looking at the competitive set to understand what's already out there, how you're going to compete against them from a business perspective, why your product is differentiated. And, you know, when you're thinking about brand, when you're thinking about how you look and what your name is and how you sound and how you go to market, you're kind of doing the same exercise, but you're just shifting your lens, right? You're looking at other competitive brands. How do they speak? What are their names? How do they look and talk to you as a customer? And often it can be useful to look not just at, you know, who's going to be your direct competition once you launch your product, but even further ahead. You know, when we build brands, we're not looking necessarily at the short term. We're trying to build something that lasts at least for your next 4 to 5 years, right? And helps kind of support your growth and takes you forward into that future. So it can be useful to look a couple of steps ahead and see what are sophisticated competitors in the space doing, and how can you emulate them, or how can you, differentiate against them as well.
I think that's some great advice. I think especially for people that are just starting out. I think there are some gold nuggets in there. And I think, like Rena was talking about, I think it's kind of a good time for us to transition a little bit to talking about the legal side of things with David. And Josh, I saw your question in the chat. I'm going to save that. I'll ask that first during the Q&A portion. But David, why don't we talk a little bit about trademarking a name? Why get a trademark? When should a new business owner kind of start looking at the trademarking process? What are the pros and cons there?
Yeah, I want to say first that everything that Rena and Ashwin said are just spot on. In terms of cost, I usually say to a brand owner that the more money they could spend on developing a persistent and strong, we'll talk about what strong means, but the more money they can spend up front in trying to create a distinctive brand, the less money they'll have to spend in trying to protect it. And just to illuminate that concept a little bit, in order to get a trademark anywhere in the world, in order to get a federal trademark or a Canadian trademark or a Mexican trademark, your mark has to be distinctive, which means there's a few rules on what that means. The first, in order for a mark to stand out, or a brand or a name or a logo to stand out, it must be distinctive. So what is distinctive? Well, it's not being descriptive, right? That's a big thing in trademark law. The trademark office is only going to give you the exclusive monopoly on a particular word or logo, right? The ability to stop others from using it for at least 10 years. The only way they're going to do that is if your mark is distinctive, which means if you're using descriptive words, then the trademark office is not going to give any one person the ability to, control everything about that descriptive word. That's the opposite of being distinctive. And so usually when we're working with companies like Emblem and or working with other kind of brand creators, the first thing that we want to do is really weigh in from a legal perspective as to whether that mark, the brand or the logo that you're trying to create, is truly distinctive. And so there's a few other rules as to how a trademark is made distinctive, but the biggest one, just because I saw the question in the chat, is this idea of being descriptive. Now, you heard from Rena that there are companies that want descriptive words, right? They want it for SEO purposes. They don't want to teach the consumer what they're trying to do. They just want to just lay it all out there. This is what we sell. This is our trademark, and so it's distinct. It's actually descriptive. We have plenty of clients like that. No matter how much we tell them up and down, you're not going to get protection on that word because it's descriptive, and you sell that product that your trademark actually is made up of. They still want it for a variety of good and bad reasons. But that's why it's so important to have a logo. That's a really big part of our analysis. Usually when folks are picking brands and they're married or love their descriptive trademark, regardless of us telling them that it's probably not the best way to go because you're not going to get exclusive protection over that descriptive word, they want it. And so from that perspective, adding a logo is really, really important. That's the way to kind of stick out when you're dealing with words that may or may not be descriptive, that may or may not be distinctive that you really want. That being said, I will say this, and then I'll pause for a second. Even logos can be descriptive. So if you are, selling, phone cases, and part of your logo is a phone case, then the trademark office can basically say that that logo is also descriptive in the same way that the words would be descriptive. And so you probably would have to overcome some sort of rejection as well in order to get that. So when we're talking about logos and creative or artistic elements, we rely on, folks like Emblem to really come up with something that is truly distinctive, especially when the words are getting caught up. So yeah, I'll pause there.
I think the descriptiveness part is probably probably a huge part of balancing the legal considerations and the kind of business marketing considerations of your company. And it's important to note when we're talking about descriptiveness, it's descriptiveness as to the goods you're selling. Kind of my favorite example that I kind of use or kind of learned in law school is we have Apple computers, right? That's not descriptive because when you're selling a computer, Apple doesn't mean anything. But if a company was to try and sell apples, they are going to have a lot of trouble trying to trademark the word Apple for their company because other companies that want to sell apples need to use the word Apple. And so it kind of all comes down to kind of the relationship between your trademark and what you're selling. Like David said with the phone case, using a phone case in the logo. But like we advise, a logo is very important. If you wind up having a mark that is descriptive, if you add that kind of design element to the mark, the trademark office is going to look at that and see the mark as more distinctive, more kind of abstract, so the consumer, so other kind of competitive companies aren't going to need to use that exact logo. You're more likely to get it trademarked. And so I guess
I just want to say one thing to what Rena and Ashton were talking about before. It sounds like when they kind of deliver up their work product to clients, they are giving them multiple names, and they're probably, which is great because these decisions are definitely not made in a vacuum, but it also helps to hedge your bet with the trademark office as well. Like, Emblem may put forward 10 marks and the client may love them all. And it's not such a bad strategy to file multiple trademark applications, again, each with their own varying risk, let's say, in this hypothetical. So having a few fallback kind of filings to kind of hedge your bet against the one that you really want is really important. So I think that's a good strategy to, kind of see the lay of the land as to what your potential marks might be, because the one that you're in love with may get caught up, and the one that you were less likely to like might actually be the one that gets through the trademark process.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea too. Also, I figure actually probably want to rewind just a little bit and talk about not how difficult it might be to get a trademark, but why in the first place a company might opt to get a trademark instead of just kind of picking their name and using it. Why is it important to get that federal registration? What are you really gaining out of that?
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good question. So I think we probably first have to start with the concept that the only way in the world to stop someone from using the same brand or name or logo or design to you is to have the registered form, the actual federal trademark, so that you're able to go into a court of law and stop that person from creating a brand that is confusingly similar to yours. So from the property aspect, having the registered form of trademark, i.e., one of the forms of intellectual property, is really the way that you kind of protect your property and have the ability to keep other people out. And the good thing is that in America, unlike most other countries in the world, you can actually get your name allowed, as it's called, allowed to you, meaning it's yours. You filed for a trademark application on the federal level, but you're not yet using it in the way that you said that you were using it. The United States allows you to do that. They allow you to file for the trademark, even though you are not using it in the way that you said that you were going to use it, because your business is not up and running yet, but you still want the piece of property to protect. And so we have the ability in the United States to file a certain type of trademark application that allows you the ability to get that mark, meaning it's like provisionally allowed to you, and then your only obligation would be to start using it in interstate commerce. So just to re-illuminate that again, if you are a New York business with New York marketing, with New York customers, and you're just a hyper local business, then you probably don't even qualify for a federal trademark. You probably qualify for what's called a state trademark, which means you can file a state trademark in the state of New York for your hyper local New York business that only has New York customers and New York marketing. And then your property is just the state of New York, which means that if there's another brand that's trying to create something similar to you using your same name, you will have the ability to stop that person in New York because you have a new trademark. But if you want the ability to stop someone else in Wisconsin or Hawaii or Alaska, you need to qualify for a federal trademark, which means you need interstate commerce. You need customers in other states. Not too hard to do, right? I mean, even most hyper local businesses have customers coming in from other states, or maybe they're delivering goods outside of the states, or maybe that's what they're planning to do. But that is the end all be all, right? You want the ability, you want all 50 states, and the only way to get that is if you have what's called interstate commerce. I think that's an important concept for sure.
Yeah, you need to show the trademark office that you're using the mark in the way that they want to see you're using it, which is just at least 2 states, basically, just at least 2 states you're getting customers from. And it might not be so hard. Even if you have just like a New York restaurant, you're inevitably probably going to get, some customers in from another state. So it's possible to do that. But like we were saying, getting that federal trademark is super important if you want to be protecting your name. You come from a much stronger place if you find it's a competitor or someone else is stealing your name or using a name that's too similar to yours. You're worried your customers are going to be confused. You come from a very strong place if you have that federal registration, when you kind of tell them to stop. And like David said, you're not going to get registered, but you can start protecting your trademark well before you actually use it, with the intent to use application. That's, it's important to plan ahead when you're doing all of this work. Once you've picked a name or picked a few names, make that filing as soon as possible, even if you're not using the trademark yet. It's definitely a really good idea. Richard, I see your hand is up. I think we should wait until probably the end to ask any questions. We're going to have like a Q&A session. So you can either wait till the end, or if you want to just throw it in the chat, you can do that too, and I'll flag it for later. And I guess we talked about this a little bit, but David, why don't we talk just a little bit about filing for the logo and the name, and like why choose both, or why file for one over another or both? We talked about kind of the descriptiveness issue, but in terms of how you're protecting a name, what is actually being protected? What is the difference between filing for a name and filing for a logo or a design?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I think I wholeheartedly agree with Emblem that you have to kind of take a multi-filing, multi-name kind of approach. But there are a few ways to file a trademark in the United States or any other country. The broadest possible way is just to file for the word, right? Like GOGGLE, right? You're just filing for what's called the word mark, and it gives you the broadest type of protection if you can get it to use that word in any stylization or font or design that you want. That's one way to file for a trademark. But sometimes that word, as we talked about, might be a problem. It might be descriptive. There might be other words out there. There might already be 500 trademarks with the word, and so you have to kind of come to terms that you're going to be 501, and there's probably going to be 500 more after you. And so, in order to kind of make yourself a little bit more distinctive, which is what trademarks are all about, we would usually say, let's add a logo. And so, the second type of filing that you could file with the trademark office is a logo. Anything that's not words, anything that's not letters, anything that's not standard characters, anything, whether it's any sort of a design or stylization or font or whatever, that's considered what we call a logo mark. And so usually we try to take a two application approach, one for the word, biggest scrutiny, broadest protection if you can get it, and then one with the words possibly added with the logo so that we have something to show, to prove, to use, to challenge the trademark office if they should reject it for some of the reasons that we were talking about before, descriptiveness, lacking distinction, stuff like that. So if we have that distinctive logo that we could add to the word, again, in a separate filing, then that's probably the more prudent way to go.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, just a brief piece of advice, if you are filing for a logo, you want to make sure that that logo, that particular exact way you file it, is going to be the way you want to use it. If you plan on redesigning the logo or coming up with something, even if it's just a little bit different, the trademark office is most likely going to want to see a new trademark for a new design logo. Even if the logo has words horizontally and your new one is going to have the words vertically stacked on top of each other, that might wind up, the trademark office is most likely going to ask you to file a whole new application. So when you're filing for the logo, make double sure that that is the one you're going to be using for a long time, or that you might be ready, or at least be ready that you might want to be filing another application in the future. Rich had a quick question in the chat. How much time is permitted to begin using an allowed trademark interstate? I assume you mean if you file for the trademark before you're using it interstate, how much time do you have to kind of prove that? It varies a tiny bit based on how long it takes to get the trademark in the first place. Once you file the trademark, it goes through the examination process, and that can take several. At this point, the trademark office doesn't even get to your trademark for 6 to 8 months probably. And then after that, they'll probably have office actions that they give to you to make some edits to the application or to change things a little bit. So that can take a little while. Or if you get a likelihood of confusion or rejection, that can take a little while. So from the period where your trademark is actually allowed, you then have 6 months after that to submit your what's called a statement of use, showing that you're using the trademark interstate. And even 6 months, and even if you don't do it within those 6 months, you could extend that period. I think it's 5 more times, 6 months each. So you wind up having, from allowance, you wind up having 2.5 or 3 years. And the period before that is probably a year on average anyway. So you have a while before you need to prove interstate commerce. Of course, all of those wind up with fees, but hopefully that answers your question. And I think this is a good time to kind of talk about our kind of how these things intermesh between what we're talking about with the legal considerations and the branding considerations. When me and David talked about it a little bit, but maybe you guys at Emblem have thoughts about balancing a descriptive trademark with kind of wanting your brand to be clear to the consumer at the outset what you're doing versus trying to get trademark protection. What is your advice? Because on our side, we try and push away from descriptiveness, right? But maybe on your side, you might want descriptiveness might be a good thing, or maybe it's not. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
We're similar to you. I think in general, our goal is to get a name passed through trademark with the least amount of risk, right? And that's obviously after consulting with a firm like yours. And so we generally don't recommend descriptive names for a whole host of reasons. Generic terms are hard to own. So it's just harder to find your brand if you Google a word that's generic. Lots of things come up, not your company. To the fact that, like you said, it's much greater risk. So sometimes what we'll suggest is that we take a combination approach, right, where we take part of a suggestive word, but we add something to it. I'll give you an example. We worked with a company that does advanced primary home health care. And so they wanted the name care in their name. Well, obviously you can imagine in the healthcare field, which was their trademark class, that's saturated, but we recommended the name MCARA. So we added an EM and an A at the end of care. MCARA, which we could still say had the sound of care, but also we said the EM stood for empathy, and it told a different story. And it was a simple, clean name. It wasn't a super long word. It had the flavor of care, but it passed through much easier and also was much more distinct. So things like that are how we try to work with clients that want to use a descriptive word, which is to have it live somewhere. As we said too, it could be in a tagline. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the name. So it's also finding the right hierarchy for how the name and the communications sit together.
I think there's probably also a case to be made for how your company is going to market and what you're selling. So if you're planning to sell a wide range of products or have a range of services, and you're trying to capture what each of those services are, and you're like, well, the best way to do that is to use a very descriptive name for each of the services. But then you're trying to trademark those descriptive names. That's kind of when you hit that wall and you face those legal hurdles, right? But if you place what we call the equity into the name of the company as a whole, right? So if you're creating a unique name for the company, like let's say Apple, right? And you're not selling apples. And then you have a variety of different products or services underneath, and those could have more descriptive names, but you're not trying to trademark each one of those, right? You've just trademarked your brand name as a whole. And that kind of helps you to address both sides of it. You feel distinct, but at the same time, you're able to describe a very kind of plain terms what it is that you create or what it is that you offer to the marketplace.
Yeah, it's really a balance. I want to have some time for questions because we had some questions in the chat pop up, but I just wanted to touch on one last point that maybe all of us kind of have something to say about, which is once you have your trademark or once you have your name and you started business, you started selling whatever it is you're selling, how do you kind of utilize that name most efficiently? How do you market it? And then for David, how do you use it in such a way that shows the trademark office you're still using it? And, so kind of leaving you not up to kind of any potential legal kind of liabilities. So start marketing side. What is the kind of strategy for continuous use throughout kind of your business? Like, what is the best way to kind of leverage your brand?
I think for us, it's appearing in the marketplace on a regular basis, and depending on what legal may advise, sometimes it's using the name in the copy as well. If it's a trademarked initiative or campaign or something like that, we use the term as we've been asked in not just the name of the company, but in the body copy. So it would be a lot of social posts. It could be new content on your website. It could be, promotions that you can point to or tangible ways that the brand is communicating. Maybe it's campaigns or Google ads or whatever it might be. But in our experience, it's demonstrating that the brand is in the marketplace and active on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think your website kind of gives you the best opportunity to do that, or your digital presence in general, right? As long as you're there, you keep that up to date. Even if you feel like digital is not my main channel and that's not where I'm selling today, it gives you an active kind of record of the fact that you've established the brand, that you're using the name. There's tools out there like the Internet Archive that can show you websites and what they looked like in the past from an archived view. That'll kind of help to demonstrate that your brand has been out there and is an active use.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The digital side of your brand. I mean, that's where a lot of people exist nowadays. So it is super important to have that kind of footprint online where people can track you. And from the legal perspective, it's also super important to continue using your trademark over time, not just so you can get it in the first place, but eventually you're going to want to renew the trademark, or you want to make sure your trademark isn't subject to some kind of cancellation proceeding or something like that. Right. So David, what is your kind of best practice, you would say, for proving that you're continuously using your trademark over time?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what Ashwin and we're saying. The best evidence by far from the trademark office perspective is your website, is the marketing materials that are found on your website. Remember, it has to have a commerce element to it. And so unfortunately today, Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok, there's no buying going on there, right? Maybe it's taking you to maybe there's a link that jumps you to a website. That's where the commerce is happening. So usually we tell our clients, try to keep good records, try to, kind of get your website up and running. To Stephen's point, we in any country in the world, including the United States, trademarks are all about use it or lose it. So if you cannot prove to the trademark office that you are, and you're going to have to check in with them every few years to let them know, that's the only way they're going to renew your trademark, is if you show them that you are using it in the same way that we intended as when we filed. So if we're using a particular depiction or a logo placement on a particular product, and we told them we're selling that product with this type of logo, with these colors, with this placement, and 5 or 6 years goes by and we go to check your website, we kind of check in with you to see if you're using it, and you've flipped the logo into a totally different depiction. You're now selling products that you never told us about, nor the trademark office about. And frankly, there's not much we can do. We're not going to be able to prove that you have continuously used it since it was registered or allowed to you. And so that's a big thing. Like our clients get kind of caught up in that for sure. Because years go by and, you're just, I'm going to rebrand and I'm going to do what I got to do. So, definitely you should be talking to Emblem and lawyers, right? When you're thinking about any sort of rebrand, right? Any sort of change or any sort of alteration in the actual trademark usage and what you're selling really needs to be discussed with us so that we could make sure that the property that we initially got for you can still be protected.
Yeah. Yeah, because unlike, copyrights and patents, trademarks can exist forever. As long as you're using it, you can be renewing that trademark every 10 years, until the world ends.
Yep.
Or at least that's how the US works right now. So yeah, super important to kind of get that down. I think now is a good time to kind of get to questions. So we have a little time for it. I'm just going to start from the top of the first question asked in the chat and kind of go from there. The first one I see is Josh Kennedy asked, in the advancement of business, how do you know what to change, I guess, your name to an abbreviation based off of competition doing the same, or is it strategic to copy competition or stay in your own lane? I guess that's kind of an Emblem question, but from the trademark perspective, if you're changing your name, you're going to need a new trademark legally. But what do you guys have to say about that, I guess?
Yeah, I think, a lot of times names evolve. If your name feels dated or is very long and cumbersome now in the age of glyphs and apps, those are things to consider. Some clients, we create a logo, but we also create that specific symbol for a way to shorten a name. Usually it's initial or just a symbol. But if you feel that a lot of your competitors have updated or refreshed their names, it is worth looking into. if you do it in a way that's uniquely you, so it's shortening your name and maybe refreshing your logo, it doesn't have to be seen as a copycat. But there also may be other ways to shorten your name, not to recommend what we did, but you can remove vowels or, try other methods so that it doesn't appear exactly like imitating. But you probably have a specific name, just feel like it's not current, or maybe it's you in association with being old in an industry where that's not positive. So as much as we try to, like Ashwin said, think about the name in the future context, if you've had the same name for a while, it's not that unusual to feel the need to refine or refresh it, keeping some sort of root of what it is, but maybe just moving it forward a little bit.
Yeah. And just to jump onto that, if you're talking about not copying a competitor, but kind of getting closer to a competitor, talk to a lawyer before you do that, because you might get sued. I guess is the issue if you're getting too close to a competitor. Talk to a lawyer. Richard Obringer, I think I held you off earlier in the conversation, so I want to give you your chance to ask your question.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm on my indoor trainer, so I'll let you guys look at the plane rather than my sweaty forehead. So I'm looking to launch a brand, and the difference is we're not really looking to launch product per se, but rather to initiate into licensing agreements. And just a snippet background, we've been using this logo since 2016 for our nonprofit. We just get so many compliments, and people approach us, including business owners, saying, you guys should merchandising line. This would be great on a cigar band, a bottle of wine, whiskey, golf apparel, like the list goes on. It's a very masculine brand. And so that's what I'm considering doing, is buying the licensing rights, the merchandising rights to do a merchandising arm off of our nonprofit. So we wouldn't really have a product per se, but rather a website which seeks to do licensing agreements, because I just think it might make more sense from a business standpoint, cost-wise, to do something like that rather than trying to go into the behemoth task of manufacturing and distribution. So my question in there is there a pathway to do that? Because I know normally I have attended some USPTO webinars. I think I hear you guys saying the same thing here. They usually want a website, some hang tags, some sort of proof of product.
Mm-hmm.
And with this venture, what would be, I guess, the path forward to do licensing rather than product? Would it be intent to use and then get something going within the allotted time frame, or what kind of path forward makes sense?
I mean, if you're looking for trademark protection, the USPTO is kind of right. That's what they want to see. But I don't think it's impossible, even if you're licensing your kind of name out, if you include in that kind of license agreement, to have that logo on the tag of any produced shirts or whatever it is you're doing, you can still get protection that way, even if you're not the one physically manufacturing the goods. That's still possible. I don't know if you, David, or if you guys at Emblem have any other thoughts about this kind of thing.
Yeah, I want to just say quickly, Richard, that websites are great to prove like you're selling a product, just like you said, but there are 10 or 12, I think there are 10 classes that are all about services. So to Stephen's point, if your business model is a licensing agency or whatever, then we just have to make sure that we're filing your trademark for those business services, and then be able to prove that some way. It doesn't necessarily have to be a website per se, but it could be like a marketing flyer that you advertise your services for. It could be even a copy of a contract of somebody actually, hiring you to do X service. We redact certain portions of the contract, but a lot of contracts these days will have like the logo or the actual brand name in the corner. So there are ways to do it. I think it's probably just working with someone that could make sure that you're in the proper class, so that you're not having issues later to prove the services in that class so that you can get your trademark. But all doable for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And maybe from a product perspective, if you're letting others use your name or identity to take adequate protections there and kind of guideline against that and delineate what people can and can't do with your brand when they use it. So if they're putting your brand on other products, they shouldn't be able to change, for example, the logo or the name of the company, or restyle it in any way they want, right? So you place those restrictions on how others use your brand in their products and marketing.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah, definitely a really good point, and something you want baked into that licensing contract in the first place. Grayson, you have your hand up.
Okay, yes. So I have a question. I feel like David would answer this best. So would you recommend my logo with my first initials of my first and last name to be more distinctive, or does it not matter if it's spelled out as my first and last name?
You're talking about like having some sort of logo that involves GK in some sort of stylization.
So would you it's more distinctive to use the logo as GK or Grayson Con, or would it not matter?
No, I think I think it could matter. It really will depend on like the first step, which we talked about, which is like doing a trademark search to see if there are other Grayson Con similar or exact matches. And for that matter, how many other GK marks out there? There could already be hundreds of G's and K's that are stylized. And that doesn't mean that you can't be, the 101st, but like you just have to come to terms with the fact that there might be 100 more after you, right? At that point. And also names are very rarely distinctive, because names, like, that the whole point of a trademark again is to make sure that you have you have a 10-year monopoly on that term. And so the government doesn't like to give out exclusive monopolies, say, hey, nobody could be named, like, you cannot use a trademark using the word using the name Grayson. That already belongs to Grayson Con. Very rarely does that happen. There's only you can count them on your fingers, the amount of people that have trademarks on their names because their names have risen to this, a point of fame, that when people hear the name, they're not just thinking about the celebrity, but they're thinking about the products and the services they sell. Until you get to that point, possibly filing a trademark with your first and last name is a tough sell for sure. It's hard.
Cool, thank you.
And I guess from a brand perspective there, it's more what you want out in the market and how you expect people to see that and recognize you. I mean, if you're providing kind of professional services and they're, very personal and you're in front of people a lot, do you want people to associate your brand with your name and, kind of create that connection? Or do you hope that GK kind of gets that across, and then you need to support that GK brand with a lot of additional material to kind of make sure that people understand it, or other investment to make sure that it's out there and people recognize it. And then from, I guess, that legal perspective, it's also, once you're out in the marketplace, right? Like, how do you, how do you keep using it and protecting it, as David mentioned?
Yeah. And if you want that full name protection, it is still possible to get it, especially if you add something to it, like we were talking about. If you just file for a word mark, Grayson Con, you might run into some issues with the trademark office saying, well, we want other people named Grayson to be able to trademark things or use their name in commerce. But if you add a design element, like a very highly stylized logo, or if you add another word to the mark, like Grayson Con Healing or whatever it is, you probably are going to have less of a problem. It kind of would be a case-by-case kind of analysis, but you can, if you want that name trademarked, it's still possible, depending on your kind of the strategy you take with the trademark office.
And we didn't talk about trademark classes. I don't know if you want to get into that, Stephen or David, but depending on where your business functions and what you're doing, you're not necessarily competing against every other GK out there. Like, I don't know, another GSK, like GlaxoSmithKline, right? You're only competing in the sectors that you're registering for.
Yeah. And talking about trademark classes, I guess there was actually a question from Richard Alpert about trademark classes. How broad are they? For example, what does a company like GE do to protect their logo when they're involved in so many widely disparate business activities? So kind of a complicated question. There are 45 trademark classes, which basically separate generally the goods and services that anyone can be providing ever, which is kind of a monumental task. And 45 isn't even kind of really enough. And so you wind up with trademark classes like class 42, where anything vaguely technological winds up inside class 42, right? So it's not just, it doesn't, when we're talking about trademark protection, it doesn't just come down to which number class you wind up classing your trademark into, but also the way you describe your goods and services to the trademark office. So there can be two trademarks both in class 42, but that are doing wildly different things, right? So that's also kind of where it comes down to a case-by-case analysis. You know, you want to have a lawyer kind of look at that kind of thing. You know, a company like GE, in so many widely disparate business activities, they probably have a dozen trademarks on GE for like a whole bunch of different things. And so trademark classes are, it's a pretty complicated idea, and you know, we can really get into the weeds with it. I don't know if you have any comments on that, David.
No, I just want to say that I just put a link for everyone to check out the current classes and how they're defined by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And you'll see the 45 classes there and kind of how you can fit in. And then to Stephen's point, like I have clients that will come in and be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna like, you know, file in like 12 classes because one day I'm gonna, sell this and sell that. Oh, okay, remember, but it's use it or lose it. So if you can't prove that your mark is being used in all 12 classes, then you're not going to get that single trademark application with 12 classes. You're not going to get it registered because you have to prove all the classes. So it doesn't really work to just say, oh yeah, I think I'm just gonna file in that class to block someone else. You still have to use it in that class in order for you to have the ability to block them.
You're going to wind up having to separate that application into multiple classes and having multiple different applications concurrently running to prove, you know, each one is being used in each particular class.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have to know that when you're filing for a trademark, the way they calculate the official fee is by class number. So if you are able to pick a class like 42, which is kind of pretty wide, kind of has a pretty wide description, and you could fit a lot of stuff into 42, you're only going to wind up having to pay the fee for one class. But if you try and file your trademark in 10 different classes, you're going to have to pay the fee 10 times. And so that's also a consideration you're going to want to make when you're filing for a trademark. Let's see. Do we have any other questions in the chat? I don't think I see any, so I don't know if anyone has a question right now. They want to raise their hand. Otherwise, it's been great.
Maybe some final thoughts from Emblem, possibly.
I would say just on the naming front, like we started, names really are important. They're one of the fastest signals to people about what your brand is and what you're about. So it's definitely worth taking the time and effort to developing a name and thinking about how the identity complements the name. They don't have to duplicate each other, and, that's probably some of the most common work we get is helping people, larger companies, set up that. So even if you're a small one person or a small group, you spend time to come up with something, ask your friends and family what they think about it, do some investigation and set yourself off on the strongest course possible.
Yeah, there may be some here that need to, take on parts of this themselves. Their business is too small or in an immature state at the moment, but there may be some others who are listening in who have more advanced operations and need to, find better, more comprehensive solutions for the brand challenges they're facing. I would just say that, within that spectrum, there's a lot of expertise and thought that goes into these processes that we've been sharing today. We've been doing this for decades, and there's still challenges with new brands that we work with every time, and every challenge is a little bit different. So I would say, find out how much you're willing to invest and how much you can dedicate to your efforts, and where you can work with professionals, they bring a lot of expertise and knowledge into the equation, much like our colleagues at Gearhart.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thank you guys at Emblem so much for coming and speaking. I think everyone kind of got a lot out of what you had to say, and it's really, really some great pieces of advice were shared today. Our next ESS will be February 29th, which is the last Thursday of this month, February. And this ESS will be on YouTube sometime next week, and we'll be sending out that notification to everyone that's signed up on the list, and a kind of recap of everything we talked about here. And contact information will be for everyone will be kind of provided in that recap. So thanks everyone for coming so much. Hope you have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.